How's it going, everybody? Jay Sanin here, welcoming you into another exciting edition of the GBI show. That's right, it's Gridiron Betting Insights here from ATS. And ladies and gentlemen, tonight we look at Championship Sunday in the NFL. That's right, we look at the AFC Championship game, the NFC Championship game, break them down from a betting perspective, give you our opinion on what the best bets are for those games, and the first ever GBI Awards. I give out my awards, at least the first half of them. We're gonna do the more serious awards this week. We're gonna do my picks for the MVP, Coach of the Year, Rookies of the Year, all that fun stuff. Next week we're gonna do some more fun ones. We're gonna do the Bad Beat of the Year. We're going to do the ATS Juggernaut of the Year. We're going to do a bunch of other fun awards next week. This week we're going to do the serious stuff, my picks for MVP, and all those other actual awards that exist in the NFL on a show that is hosted by somebody who liked the. So we hope you enjoy the show tonight. Of course, if you want to get in touch with us, if you are watching live, you can do so. Use the chat box on YouTube. You check in on Twitter as well at IO_ATS. And of course, don't forget to go to ats.io/GBI, exclusive sportsbook bonuses from the show. Louisiana just launched, and we have from Louisiana Caesars and Bet Rivers represented at ats.io/GBI. So all my friends in Louisiana, all presumably zero of you, be sure to check out the page and take advantage of what we have to offer you there. Now let's get into it right away. The GBI Awards. We're going to start with those. We'll get to the championship games a little bit later in the show. Now we will start with not the MVP award. We'll kind of start from the bottom, work our way up. And we will start with Comeback Player of the Year in the NFL. I mean, really a two-person race. The latest odds from DraftKings before they were taken down had Dak Prescott as the favorite around -140, Joe Burrow around +110. And I mean, I would give it to Burrow if I had to choose. And that's kind of going to be a theme throughout the show that I would prefer Joe Burrow over other more established choices for certain individual awards. But you look at the severity of the injuries that they suffered. And yes, Dak had a pretty gruesome leg injury, but Joe Burrow suffering a season-ending knee injury and rapidly rehabbing it in time to be ready for this season and doing a lot more with less, in my opinion, kind of makes him the player I would give the Comeback Player of the Year award to, even if he hasn't had quite the same established career as somebody like Dak Prescott. Dak, not as impressive numbers-wise, in my opinion, either. I mean, Burrow led the league in yards per attempt and was way up there in a lot of categories. Dak was 10th in yards per attempt this season. Only had a few more touchdowns, a few fewer picks. Not a big difference in terms of those outputs. I think that Burrow doing more with less did deserve the award a little bit more, but I think we will see it go to Dak Prescott just because he is, in fact, Dak Prescott, and he's had kind of a more tenured career in the league to come back from an injury to kind of resume with his performance this past season. So I'd give it to Burrow, but I do think that it goes to Prescott. Next up, we will talk Coach of the Year in the NFL, and kind of a three-person race here for most of the season, right? You have Mike Vrabel of the Titans, Zach Taylor of the Bengals, and of course LaFleur of the Green Bay Packers. And I preface this by saying that my opinion on this award does not have anything to do with the way that their teams played in the postseason, because it's going to come across that way. But again, I would give it to Zach Taylor of the Cincinnati Bengals. I think that he overcame some kind of bigger limitations with the roster in order to have success this year. And I'm not just talking about making it to the conference championship game. I'm just talking about in the regular season, winning a very competitive division in the AFC North compared to, Vrabel played in kind of a subpar division there in the AFC South, right? You had the Texans and the Jaguars. And yes, the Colts were competitive, but ultimately limited by Carson Wentz at quarterback down the stretch. And then LaFleur, again, yeah, you win the division, you get the 1 seed in a division where the Bears were terrible, the Lions were terrible, even though they tried really hard under Dan Campbell, just not that good yet. And the Minnesota Vikings, who are limited by Kirk Cousins as their quarterback. I give Zach Taylor all the credit in the world. Overcoming a disastrous offensive line to help the Bengals get to where they got this season. Um, and that's not to say that those other coaches didn't do a good job. I think Vrabel, especially with the way the Titans overcame the injuries to those key skill position players. I mean, Derrick Henry missing a big chunk of the season. Julio Jones, we barely saw him this year. And A.J. Brown missing some significant time as well. I think Vrabel deserves a lot of credit, but I do think that Zach Taylor was the best choice for Coach of the Year. Vrabel was the favorite the last time odds were available at DraftKings at minus 185. Taylor around plus 250, and LaFleur, he's around plus 350 or around 4-1. I don't think that really LaFleur has a chance in this regard. I think that it'll come down to Vrabel and Taylor. Again, I'd give it to Taylor at plus money representing the Bengals, just like I would Burrow for comeback player of the year. Now, an award where there will not be any controversy, and the Gbi Awards here, we agree with that, is a defensive rookie of the year. Micah Parsons was like minus 10 grand. And for those of you who are uninitiated or at least vaguely new to sports betting, that is, you bet 10,000 to win 100 on Micah Parsons for defensive rookie of the year. And it makes sense. Listen, he finished sixth in the league in sacks this season among all players, not among rookies, among all defensive players with 13 sacks this season. He had an incredible year, and I will not argue the GBI award for defensive rookie of the year will in fact go to Micah Parsons. There will not be any no debate, no hot takes there. He will easily take that award as far as I'm concerned. Now, a more contentious award for rookies this season was the Offensive Rookie of the Year. And it was still a two-horse race, I guess, when it came down to it, between Jamar Chase and Mac Jones. They were the two remaining candidates kind of when all was said and done this year. And Chase is a heavier favorite than Jones. Chase minus 250, Jones around 2-1 odds to take home this award. And it's hard to argue against Jamar Chase based off of his output this season. I mean, Chase, fourth in the NFL in total in receiving yardage this year, over 1,400 receiving yards, had 13 touchdowns, which was third in the NFL. And he averaged 18 yards a catch on his 81 receptions this season. He was incredible this year for the Bengals. He will end up winning this award. I don't think it'll be particularly close in terms of the voting. The one thing you say about Mac Jones is he does play the quarterback position, which of course predisposes him to a lot of attention and a lot of credit that he may not necessarily deserve. And Mac Jones wasn't great this season for the New England Patriots by any stretch of the imagination. He was kind of a game manager, middle of the road in a lot of the quarterback stats, in terms of the touchdowns and completion rate, things like that. Wasn't great by any means, but he was a quarterback of a playoff team, which will earn him some consideration for the award, whether or not he's deserving at the end of the day. And listen, he had a fine season, but he's not going to keep up with Jamar Chase in terms of winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year award, especially when down the stretch, a lot of the offense came through the running game for the New England Patriots. And early in the season, he just wasn't asked to do enough to make that real impact to win any sort of awards. Of course, before the season, I had recommended Kyle Pitts for the Offensive Rookie of the Year. He was going off at 10-1 odds before the start of the season, and he picked it up in the second half. He ended up setting, I think, or at least getting close to a rookie tight end record for receiving, but that unfortunately was not enough to keep up with Jamar Chase, who, he just blew the competition away in terms of his output this year among rookie pass catchers and, really rookie skill position players as a whole. I think Najee Harris was a popular pick before the season to come away with the Offensive Rookie of the Year. That did not happen. And So Pitt's at 10-1. It sounded good at the time, and he did put forth a decent season, but it wasn't consistent enough. And early in the season is what really killed Kyle Pitts. He didn't make that immediate impact because the offense was struggling so much early in the season for the Atlanta Falcons. They didn't know quite what they had with Cordero Patterson early in the year. So there were a few things that kind of held Kyle Pitts back, I think, from having a more consistent campaign from start to finish that may have really made him a contender to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. Now, we have a few awards left to cover here on the first half of the GBI Awards here on the GBI show. Like I said, we're going to do the serious awards, the actual ones that get given out at NFL Honors. I believe that happens, next week? That's the gap week between the Super Bowl and the Conference Championship games. That's crazy to think about. We're going to do the serious ones this week, and then next week we're going to do some fun ones. We're going to do like the bad beat of the year and stuff like that on next week's show. So we got a few more actual serious awards to get to right now, and we will start again with the Defensive Player of the Year award, and TJ Watt, the overwhelming favorite to win this one at around -350. Micah Parsons comes in at 2-1. Aaron Donald at 5-1 to win Defensive Player of the Year. And again, it makes sense, right, to have a heavy favorite here in TJ Watt. Of course, he tied the single season record for sacks with 22.5. He was also top 5 in the league in terms of forced fumbles. He forced 5 fumbles this season, which put him top 5 in the league. And before we go any further, again, I will reiterate as a New York Giants supporter that the single season sack record, in my opinion, will be fully Michael Strahan's, even if TJ Watt tied it this year because of the extra game. And as Wavy Davy of the Mush Bros mentioned a couple of weeks ago, he mentioned the Brett Favre sack for Strahan. You know what? It's fine. Did it in a 17-week season, 16 games. And so that is all that matters as far as I'm concerned. Very legitimate for Michael Strahan, not so much from TJ Watt. Of course, I'm just kidding. The sack record, not that important. I am not here to defend the sanctity of it. I am not a baseball Hall of Fame voter trying erroneously to defend the sanctity of something that ultimately doesn't matter as much as I think it does. TJ Watt had an excellent season, and I think that he is more than deserving of Defensive Player of the Year. Of course, personally, I'm glad that he did not break the single season sack record and that Michael Strahan's name can remain attached to that in some form or fashion. But of course, I can also acknowledge that TJ Watt, he might just mess around and break the single season sack record next year. So it's not as if that record is going to be safe forever and ever. It could very well fall next season, but at least for now, I had one thing to stay happy about this season as a fan of the New York Giants, and that is the fact that the single season sack record did not completely fall at the end of this year. And also, I got a couple of top 10 draft picks out of it. And Brian Daboll is the new head coach of the New York Giants. So a couple of good things going on for the Giants right now. As the Giants, who knows, they might actually possess an offense capable of moving the ball next season with Daboll as their head coach, as opposed to the abysmal Joe Judge, Dave Gettleman era in New York. It's weird to feel optimism about my favorite team, is what I will say about the Daboll hire. I had made a note to talk about that at some point during the show, and what better time than shoehorning Michael Strahan's single season sack record into the Defensive Player of the Year discussion, I suppose. But very exciting times for the Giants as that news came out on Friday that Daboll will be the new head coach of the Giants. I think that's a home run hire. You bring in a guy with an offensive mind, hopefully help Daniel Jones. And if Daniel Jones isn't the guy, you can bring in somebody who will be the guy for that head coach in the near future. I think that is an absolute home run hire for New York. And as it pertains to the Defensive Player of the Year, I think it's an absolute home run that it will be TJ Watt at the end of this season. Now let's move on to the Offensive Player of the Year. And this might be the most competitive award on the slate in terms of the actual awards that we talk about during the GBI Awards this year. It's a two-person race, but it is a very competitive two-person race. Cooper Kupp and Jonathan Taylor are the two options. They were both at minus 110 at DraftKings earlier this week when that was last on the board. And I guess, I mean, at this point, it's really a matter of personal preference between these two. It's not as if one has overwhelming statistical advantages over the other. Both of them had amazing seasons, and it's really a take your pick situation as far as I'm concerned, and that's what the odds say as well. Now, Cooper Kupp this season, 145 catches, 1,947 yards, and 16 receiving touchdowns. Those were the second highest reception and yardage totals in a single season in NFL history, receiving wise. That is incredible. Of course, it should be noted, just like I did with TJ Watt in defending Michael Strahan's honor, Cooper Kupp did have an extra game to work with in order to end up in the top two all time in a single season in those two categories, right? Those other players in the history of the game are doing so in a 16-game season. Kupp did have a 17th game to help him kind of rise up the ranks. Either way, an insane season from Cooper Kupp. Now, Jonathan Taylor, he had 1,811 yards on the ground, 18 rushing touchdowns, and he averaged 5.5 yards a carry this season, which is just incredible. He's the reason that things went so well in Indianapolis this year. Of course, the offensive line helping him immensely, but you look at the way that that Colts offense functioned this year, and the fact that Carson Wentz only turned the ball over a few times, at least relative to what he did in Philadelphia. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that defenses really had to respect a running game led by Jonathan Taylor that they didn't have to worry about when Wentz was the quarterback in Philly. I thought that was a big difference maker, and Jonathan Taylor deserves a world of credit for that. Again, I think it's a matter of personal preference which guy you go with here. I don't think that there's a wrong answer necessarily. I would give it to Kupp. And my reasoning is that both guys had amazing seasons, but you look at the way Taylor performed that final week of the season, right? He could have really put his stamp on this award if he had a big game, got in the end zone once or twice against the Jaguars, helped his team secure a playoff berth. Instead, Taylor rushes for 77 yards in week 18 against the Jaguars, doesn't get into the end zone, and the Colts lose and get bumped out of the postseason. When you have two guys who had such a big year, that's when you kind of have to nitpick a little bit. And I think that this is kind of me doing that and saying that, okay, I think Cooper Kupp, by not, completely ruining his team's season in the final hurdle, I think he deserves the award a little bit more. Given that both guys put up insane numbers, there needs to be something to separate them. And I think that that would be the factor for me that gets the job done. Now, we have one more award left to tackle here on the GBI Awards portion of the Gridiron Betting Insights show. And it is the MVP award in the NFL. Aaron Rodgers, the overwhelming favorite to win this award. He was around minus 400 to take it. Tom Brady was around 5-1 odds. Joe Burrow, 10-1 odds. And I don't say this again, this is not because of the season results for these teams and the fact that only one of them is still competing this year, but I would take Burrow over Brady and Rodgers to win this award. You look at the statistical outputs from these players this season, and I would like to specifically compare Burrow to the presumptive MVP in Rodgers. Now, Burrow, better than Rodgers in yardage, completion rate, yards per attempt, and yards per game. Rodgers better than Burrow in touchdowns and interceptions, slightly better in quarterback rating, a 3-point edge to Rodgers in that regard. But you contextualize what these two guys did, right? The fact that it's pretty even statistically in terms of who's winning what categories. You contextualize it with the fact that Burrow was sacked more than twice as much this season. I believe it was 51-24, the sack difference. And I think that speaks to how much more valuable Burrow was this season than Rodgers. You add in the fact that he did a quick rehab on a season-ending knee injury to get to that point. And it's not as if I'm doing this as a pro Burrow, anti Rodgers stance. Listen, I came into this season thinking Joe Burrow would be remembered as one of the disappointments of recent NFL draft history, and he came out and completely proved me wrong. I would go with Joe Burrow over Aaron Rodgers for MVP. I think that the fact that they had a statistically comparable season, the fact that the Bengals won a much more competitive division, even though they didn't get a 1 seed like the Packers, I think there is a lot to be said, a lot of credit that deserves to go to Joe Burrow for that. And I think that he would be more valuable, in my opinion, than Rodgers, who had a better roster, had better skill position guys. I think that it makes a lot of sense to go with Burrow for the MVP award. So that is the first half of the GBI Awards. We will come back next week and we'll do a little year in review. Of course, next week we're going to look at the Super Bowl matchup. We'll get an early view of that as well. But next week we are going to look at some of the more fun gambling related things that happened in the NFL this year on the GBI Awards. That is halftime of this week's GBI show as well. Of course, at halftime, we like to remind you, check out ats.io/GBI. Exclusive sportsbook offers from the show. A lot of states represented in these legal U.S. markets, whether it's Colorado, whether it's New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and now Louisiana. Louisiana just went live on Friday. January 28th was the day. That is, of course, why the GBI show is being done on a Friday. We had a lot of work to do to get ready for the Louisiana launch, and the show got pushed back by a day. I appreciate everybody's patience with that. But we have a couple of the Louisiana sports books represented at ats.io/GBI. Bet Rivers and Caesars are those books. You get a lot more books over there as well, depending on what state you live in. Now let's get to these championship games in the NFL. All the fun stuff's out of the way. Let's get to the main event here on the second half of the show. We're going to start with the AFC Championship game. It is Bengals Chiefs. Bengals 7-point dogs on the road, total 54.5. Of course, last week, the Bengals upsetting the Tennessee Titans on the road to get to this point. And of course, the Chiefs playing arguably the greatest postseason football game ever contested, beating the Buffalo Bills 42-36 in overtime, a game where both teams scored twice, 2 scoring possessions for each team in the final 2 minutes of regulation between the Bills and Chiefs. Of course, the Chiefs tying it up with a 13-second field goal drive at the end of regulation and then scoring a touchdown in overtime to beat Buffalo. And we can have the debate about the overtime rules another time. That is not what I'm focused on here on tonight's show. I'm talking about betting the conference championship games. Would I have loved to have seen the Bills win that game? Yes. Do I think that the rules need to be changed? No comment. We'll talk about that. We have a whole offseason to talk about the rule changes in the NFL. Right now, let's talk about the AFC title game between the Bengals and the Chiefs. And let's talk about the fact that these two teams played a high-scoring game the first time they met, right? Both teams up around the 30s in that game. Jamar Chase with over 200 receiving yards. Both teams lit each other up on the scoreboard in that game. The Bengals, of course, winning on a late field goal. And you'll remember that was the game the Bengals clinched the AFC North. It was also a game where in that fourth quarter, on that final drive, the Chiefs committed a boatload of penalties to give the Bengals chance after chance after chance to score on that final drive to win the game. And eventually, by virtue of them having just so many opportunities and the clock running down, they actually went and scored and ended the game. It took them a very long time, but that is exactly what they did. Now, there are some differences, I think, between now and then that need to be addressed. Granted, that game happened at the beginning of January. It's not as if that game happened in week 2 of this season. It happened just a few weeks ago. But I think the Chiefs are such a different team for the better than they were then. I mean, their defense is playing at a respectable level. Granted, it didn't last week, but nobody was going to stop Josh Allen the way he was playing this postseason. They played very well against the Steelers. I think that they're at least trending in the right direction. But I think the more alarming thing is the offensive line play from the Bengals taking a huge step back compared to what we saw about 4 weeks ago in that, not a must-win game, but a game that they had to win if they wanted to clinch the division then and there. The Bengals have taken 11 sacks in 2 playoff games. And granted, that number is a little higher because they took 9 last week against the Titans. So, you look at 5.5 sacks a game in the playoffs. Well, 9 of them came last week against Tennessee. But Steve Spagnuolo dials up pressure constantly. And I've got to wonder, how are the Bengals going to block up that pressure? It's going to have to be a lot of quick throws, and I don't know if they're going to give Burrow enough time to complete the throws that he needs to. I certainly don't think we're going to see another 200-plus yard game from Jamar Chase in this contest. I think at the end of the day, the Bengals not as good as they have looked on the scoreboard during this postseason, right? You look at the Raiders game, they got a goal line interception to preserve that victory. You look at the Titans game, they kind of got lit up defensively in that contest. They gave up 6.8 yards per play in that game. Of course, 6.8 yards per play, well above the threshold of the number one offense in the league in that regard this season during the regular year. Right? The number one offense in the league in terms of yards per play this season had 6.1 yards per play. The Bengals gave up way more than that against the Titans, but they benefited from those Tannehill interceptions, right? All those turnovers really bailed out the Bengals, who just didn't play that well defensively outside of those couple of moments where Tannehill made some pretty terrible mistakes. Meanwhile, the Chiefs, they've averaged 7.4 yards a play against the Steelers, 7.6 yards a play against the Buffalo Bills. They have been unstoppable offensively so far in this postseason. And I think the numbers really bear out that the Chiefs have been so far superior to Cincinnati during this postseason, despite the fact that the Bengals are a really good story and that they've made some defensive plays when they've absolutely had to in order to get these victories. The Bengals, by the way, they have not broken 5.5 yards a play in either of their postseason games. So their offense has just not been explosive the way that we saw when Jamar Chase was going off for over 200 yards against the Chiefs about 4 weeks ago. They just have not had that element, and I don't think they're going to regain that element against the Chiefs team that is going to pressure the quarterback, knowing that the quarterback hasn't had time to throw as it is. I think we're going to see a lot of pressure on Burrow here. I don't think that's going to go particularly well for the Bengals and the Chiefs. They're just going to keep rolling offensively. They've gained over 1,000 yards of offense in their last 2 games during this postseason. Do we see them go along with that average around 500 a game? I'm going to say no, and here's why. I think that the Chiefs get out to a pretty sizable lead in this game, realize, okay, we're up big. We are not going to take a lot of chances because turnovers are what have kept the Bengals alive this postseason. I think they play conservatively down the stretch. And they also just realize, listen, we don't need to hurt Patrick Mahomes a couple weeks before the Super Bowl. I think the Chiefs get out to a big lead. They sit on it. I think we see the Chiefs win and cover. And I think we see the under 54.5 come through in this game. I think that is the big thing for me, because I don't think we see the Cincinnati Bengals pick things up offensively. I would love to be wrong and see a shootout in this game, because that would be great from an entertainment perspective, especially following up what we saw with Chiefs-Bills. Again, that might have been the greatest playoff game we've ever seen. Allen and Mahomes just throwing laser beams against one another for that entire end of the fourth quarter into overtime. I would love to see that again. I do not think we are going to see that here, because I don't think that the Bengals are going to hold up their end of the bargain on the offensive side of the ball. Tyrann Mathieu coming back, I think, makes a big difference in this game for the Chiefs. Of course, him coming back from a concussion after missing last week against the Bills. And you want to talk about a player who really could have helped in the secondary down the stretch in that contest against Buffalo would have been Tyrann Mathieu. I think him being back makes a difference. I think Steve Spagnuolo is going to dial up a ton of pressure against the Bengals, and I think that we are going to see Kansas City advance to their third straight Super Bowl. But if I had to make a play on this game, I think the under is the way to go. I mean, it got bought up from around 51 once the line dropped last Sunday, and I think that buying it back at 54.5 would be the best play. I don't hate the idea of taking the Chiefs to cover either. Maybe if you're worried about laying a touchdown in a conference championship game, maybe you take them first half instead, especially with the fact they might sit on the ball, get backdoored late in that game. I don't hate that idea either, but I think that the under 54.5 would be the best play in this game. I get it. It's scary. You're dealing with the Kansas City Chiefs offense, and you're dealing with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, but I think that that would be the best play, would be the under in this contest. Now let's move to the NFC Championship game, ladies and gentlemen, on the GBI show. Of course, only 2 games to talk about, which is depressing in that we are almost out of games here. You think about it, we've only got 2 games left to cover the rest of the season now on the show. The NFC Championship game and whatever the Super Bowl matchup ends up being. It's very bittersweet because I guess on one hand, we're going to make it through the season this time, which season 1 of the GBI show, that wasn't the case. So we're going to make it through the season this time, but sadly, we're almost out of season to cover. But don't worry, we'll get the off season going. We'll cover basketball if we need to, whatever we got to do. The show will go on, and it will be a lot of fun. NFC Championship game now. 49ers Rams is the matchup, an all NFC West affair. Niners 3.5-point underdogs on the road. Total 45.5 for this game. Of course, the Niners, another defensive gem last week. They beat the Green Bay Packers in Lambeau. It was 13-10. The Niners scoring on 2 field goals and a blocked punt for a touchdown. And they get the game-winning field goal as time expired to upset the number 1 seed in the NFC. Aaron Rodgers goes home, and he blames, the woke mob or whatever for wanting to see him fail. It was pretty funny. And then you have the Rams beating the Buccaneers in a really strange game. I mean, the Rams, they went up huge in that game. They give the lead away completely. It's a tie game down the stretch. They hit a deep ball. They kick a field goal to win the game. And you got to wonder what the deal is with these Rams, right? End of the regular season, they blow a 17-point lead to the Niners. Still win the division despite losing that game, but they blew a big first half lead. Now, in the playoffs against the Buccaneers, 27-3, blow a huge lead. They end up winning the game and advancing. But you can't afford to do that in the NFL playoffs more than once, right? I mean, that has to change for the LA Rams. The question is, can they change it? And I think the answer is yes here. I would lean toward the Rams to cover this game. You have a huge edge here in coaching and quarterback play. And I think that's going to be, I think that's going to be the big difference maker in this game. When you get down the stretch in the playoffs, coaching and quarterback play a huge determining factor in who has success. And it's not often that you have the advantage in both regards benefiting one team, but this week, both games feature that, right? The Chiefs have a huge advantage in coaching and quarterback play over the Bengals. And then you have, of course, the Rams, I think, with a big advantage in coaching and quarterback play with McVay and Stafford over Garoppolo and Shanahan. And I think that's going to be kind of a big difference in this game. Trent Williams dealing with a sprained ankle, I think, is a big deal, which will not benefit the 49ers. But you'll look at the quarterback numbers coming into this game in the postseason. Matt Stafford averaging over 10 yards per pass attempt, 6.9 yards per attempt for Jimmy Garoppolo. And you can say some of that was, they played in the snow last week. But I don't think that's valid because he didn't light it up either against the Dallas Cowboys. Garoppolo's passing yards prop is at like 230 or something like that. I think that he goes under that number. He went under it by failing to break 200 yards against the Rams in the final week of the regular season. I just don't think Garoppolo, I mean, first of all, he's dealing with a shoulder injury, so I'm not trying to disparage him in terms of his actual ability as a player. I mean, he's going through some injuries, and I think that's a factor. I'm not trying to upset Jeff Garcia over here by saying that he's what is he? He's getting an A on the group project despite doing none of the work. He's dealing with some injuries, and he kind of is more of a game manager type quarterback even when he is healthy, which is fine. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but that's just who he is. And I think that this game they're going to need more than that from Garoppolo, and I don't think he'll be able to provide it. The Rams, by the way, defensively, really good. Listen, they allowed just over 5 yards of play against the Buccaneers last week, even though they did manage to come back in that game, Tampa Bay. The Rams held them right around 5 yards of play, and they held the Cardinals under 3.5 yards per play. Listen, Von Miller combined with Aaron Donald making impact plays on the defensive front. The secondary might have Taylor Rapp back for this week, which is significant given that they signed Eric Weddle from off the junk pile prior to the postseason because of their safety injuries. If Taylor Rapp can actually go dealing with concussion aftermath, that would be a huge boost for the Rams. Listen, the Niners, they have failed to average 5.5 yards of play in either of their postseason games, and they have been able to lean on the defense. But I think that this Rams offense, man, you have Odell Beckham now to help out, right? To join Cooper Kupp. You can't just take away Kupp anymore. You've got to worry about Beckham, Tyler Higbee. He hasn't scored yet in the postseason. I think he's around 2-1 as an anytime touchdown scorer this week. Tyler Higbee, I think, has a chance to get into the end zone this week. I think the Rams play more like the team we saw in the first half at home against the Niners than the team we saw in the second half against the Niners. You have to remember in that game, the second half, the Arizona Cardinals were trailing the Seattle Seahawks for that entire game at the end of the regular season, at the same time that the Rams were playing the Niners. The Rams knew if the Cardinals lose, we win the division anyway. I'm not saying that they took their foot off the gas or McVay stopped showing things. I'm not saying that they didn't try to win that game. But you combine the Rams knowing, hey, listen, we're probably in the playoffs at this point, combined with the Niners playing for their playoff lives, knowing that the Saints were beating, I believe it was Carolina, which had the Niners lost that game, would have knocked them out of the postseason. I'm just saying, I think the sense of urgency for the Niners was much greater than it was for the Rams in that spot, which will not be the case here with both teams vying for a Super Bowl appearance. I think we're going to see the Rams play a lot more like they did in the first half when they jumped out to a 17-0 lead than we are going to see the team that played in the second half and let the Niners do whatever they wanted down the stretch of that game. Now, there's been some talk about the crowd for this game and who it's going to favor. A lot of talk about secondary market tickets going to fans in Northern California rather than fans that are believed to be Rams fans. I don't know about any of that. I'm not going to speculate. What I will say is these LA teams are kind of used to playing without a real home field advantage, at least a full-on home field advantage, right? LA, it's not exactly a town where people, put down roots necessarily, right? It's a lot of people who move in from different areas of the country, have different fandoms. I think that's something that the Rams are used to. It's definitely something that the Chargers are used to. And I don't think that's going to play a huge role either way in this game. I think that the Rams are going to get it done. They're going to get to the Super Bowl. I think they cover the spread here. I do. I think they win by around a touchdown. And I think that we see a Rams-Chiefs Super Bowl, which we would, of course, hope was as good as that game they played. What was it, the one that was supposed to be in Mexico City, that Monday night game where both teams scored into the 50s? It was one of the greatest games ever played during the regular season. I think that's going to be the matchup. Rams-Chiefs, McVay versus Reed, Mahomes versus Stafford. I think it's going to be a really cool one if we do, in fact, get that matchup. But I think that both these games are going to be a lot of fun to watch on Championship Sunday. Of course, hopefully we cash some tickets in the process. Ladies and gentlemen, that is your GBI show for Conference Championship Weekend. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your patience this week as we do a late Friday night show here. this week. Of course, next week we will be back with a first look at the Super Bowl matchup, right? We will talk about the early line. We will talk about any other markets that pop up throughout the early portion of the 2-week Super Bowl betting period. We will also do the fun side of the Gbi Awards, right? Gbi Awards Part 2 next week. Worst beat, best ATS team, best fade. We'll do a lot of fun stuff next week on the show. And of course, we will continue to give you the information you need to make the best possible decisions in the NFL betting markets. Until next time, Jay Sanin saying good night and good luck on your NFC and AFC championship game bets this weekend.